All right, welcome to the power of KPIs, how to improve practice revenue by monitoring your KPIs. You're all in for a wonderful treat. This session is absolutely tremendous. This session is being sponsored by Unislink. Unislink is a full service revenue cycle management company dedicated to preserving the practice of independent medicine by providing technology and services and best practices to allow organizations to be financially successful and enjoy the freedom of improving the lives of patients. Um, by way of housekeeping, this session is being recorded and all participants will be muted and the cameras will be disabled. We are going to be doing some Q&A towards the end of this session. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and use the chat button at the top of your screen to ask questions. We're also going to do a quick poll during this webinar and your answers are going to be displayed on the screen, but all of the responses will be 100% anonymous. And then finally, we will send you a recording of this session along with a link for you to download the slides after the session is over. And so let me take a moment here and introduce you to today's presenter. I've had the pleasure of working with Patty Peets for many decades now, and you're all in for a very big treat. Patty Peets is the Chief Revenue Officer for Unislink and has a long track record in revenue cycle management and doing assessments for practices. She's been in Rev Cycle for over 30 years, along with myself, and worked with all sizes of practices and specialties over those years. And I think she's done several thousand, definitely thousands of practices analysis, and she's going to be leveraging some of that knowledge and sharing that with you today. She's easily the most knowledgeable person I know about Rev Cycle. And with that, Patty, I'm just going to turn the time to you. I know you've got a lot to cover, so teach us your magic.
Wow, thanks, James. I was sitting yesterday thinking about trying to do the math, how many analysis and assessments we've done, and it probably is close to like 3,000. And then I started thinking, but I think James has probably been in half of
Half of
those with
those.
me. Right. Yeah. So it's great to have James here with me. He is definitely one to know and cherish our friendship and our professional careers together. So let me ask you something. Why should a practice really know your KPIs? And we work with practices all the time, uh, and some practices have software that gives it to them, serves it up to them really nicely on dashboards, and some practices don't have the ability to get them very easily, and they work really hard to get them. But if you can't measure something, you certainly aren't going to be able to improve it, right? And I didn't actually say that, but I probably said those words about 3,000 times as well, and finally had to look up somebody like who actually coined that phrase, because I heard somebody acting like it's something that I had coined because I had said it so often. But it truly is a way for you to understand what if there's opportunities for you guys to improve anything in your rev cycle. And so if you think about what you're trying to do, is it do you have any problems that you're trying to solve? Are there issues that are impacting your practice today? Or you think they may be impacting your practice? Are you searching for like greater control over your financial performance? Are you concerned that you're leaving money on the table? Are you trying to reduce cost? All of these things are common things that we talk to practices about all the time. But if you have any of those questions, or you have any uncertainty about any of those areas, you definitely should be looking at your key performance indicators, because they have a wealth of knowledge that you can find. So James mentioned that we're going to do a poll. So we're going to do a quick survey. And so if everybody will get their little fingers on the keyboard ready to answer this survey, Katie, I think, is going to launch the survey for us.
And can we click multiples here? It looks like it.
Let's see. I'm looking here. There we go.
And if you look at the meeting chat, you'll be able to see the responses to these. So it's a dead heat with the top three. Up, staffing shortages is pulling ahead here a little bit.
I can't see the result. Well, I'm trying not to show. I don't want to go to a different screen and mess up my thing. So you'll have to give me the results, James.
Okay, right now it's a dead heat between denials management is just ahead by a share, by a hint. We have staffing shortages coming in second place, rising costs coming in. But the percentage of respondents that are choosing is denials, rising costs, staffing shortages, and regulatory burden is down towards the bottom, and not too many others in this one. So um, that's fairly interesting. It's fairly evenly distributed between denials, rising costs, and staffing shortages. So we can key off of that, Patty.
Okay. Oh, I figured out how to see it myself. Okay, there you go. Yeah, that's interesting. So James and I spend about at least twice a day talking about stats that we're hearing or reading or getting informed about. And denial, the increase in denials has been one that we've spent a lot of time talking about over the last 30 or 45 days. So, yeah, that's very interesting.
A recent
Where's,
stat poll by
yeah,
NGMA said that 60% of practices say that it's higher than it was last year overall denials.
yeah, that's crazy. And then there was also one that showed on average that there was a 50% increase in denials or something like that. So anyway, those are kind of in line with a lot of what we see. This is not as recent, but this was towards the fall of last year where it showed 58% of physician practices were saying staffing was the top challenge, 27% was revenue challenges, 20% were expense challenges, and 4% were technology. So um, and 90% say costs are rising faster than the revenue. So all of those things are problems, right? So if you're experiencing any of those things, or you even have concerns about any of those things, it really would be a good time to really look at your KPIs, look at your financials, and do a deep dive into assessing how you're doing. These are some of the things. There's lots of reasons why medical practices are leaving money on the table or losing money. These are some things just over the 30 plus years that I've been doing it that I've kind of some things seem to always be on the list. And then other years, other things will rise to the top. And you can just read these. I'm not going to read them here, but you can read what some of the common reasons on why people lose money. But the thing I wanted to point out is one of the reasons people lose money is that their failure to measure key performance indicators. Because again, if you're not measuring it, you certainly are not going to be able to fix it or even know that there's a problem. There's a lot of practices that we work with that don't even realize that they have a problem because some of their KPIs may even look healthy. And we're going to dive into how those are calculated and kind of some of the things that you can look for. These are something that I call these trigger events, but you've got internal events, you've got external events that can cause you alarm or cause you some uncertainty, and also should trigger you to do a financial analysis and really make sure that you have a pulse on your financial performance, right? And you've got cash flow drops, uh, physicians leaving, your billing manager quit, the front desk supervisor has left, you're having staffing shortages, you're maybe you've merged or acquired another practice, you've got growth or you've got loss of physicians. All these different things are trigger events, and all of these things should trigger a really deep analysis. Now, as an industry, we had one of the biggest trigger events that I think has ever happened. And I'm playing with James because we did not script any of this. But you know what that trigger event was, James?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a cybersecurity breach which changed healthcare, which affected so many people's revenue claims coming back, right? EDI.
Yeah, so that was huge. And so so a lot of people may be seeing a little bit of a cash drop right now because of the dip in cash during that time when Change Healthcare was fixing that cyber attack and trying to figure out how they were going to manage that. But that definitely is an example of a trigger event that you want to make sure that you're looking at things to see if you're getting caught back up. And so the best way to do that is to look at your KPIs, and the KPIs that we're going to talk about today. And some of these we're going to go by pretty quickly. We're going to kind of speed through a few of them and spend a little bit more time on a few that are pretty critical and a little bit trickier. But we're going to look at the AR over 120, the days in AR, the average reimbursement per encounter, denial rates, gross collection, revenue realization, and net collection rate. There's many more KPIs out there, but these are some standard benchmarked KPIs that if you can have a pulse on these and get a handle on where you are from a financial perspective on these particular KPIs, it will tell you a lot of information that you need to know. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. We'll start with the accounts receivable metrics, AR over 120. It definitely is, your AR is in buckets where you've got your current 30 to 60, 60 to 90, anything over 120, anything over 180, anything over 365. Those are kind of buckets that you're looking at. So your AR over 120 is that exclusive bucket of aged AR that has gotten to be 120 days. Now, just because something's gotten to be 120 days doesn't necessarily mean that it's lost, but it is very important that you understand that AR over 120 is a KPI and there is a benchmark around what that percentage of your total AR should be. And that could be anywhere from 9 to 15%. MGMA will say that even anything under 25% is healthy enough. I think in today's economic landscape and the high deductible plans and patient responsibility, I personally think that 15% or lower is a much better goal to have for your AR over 120. But what's most important, if you do have an AR over 120 percentage that's higher than the benchmark, you want to understand what is in that bucket. Is it uncollectible money? Is it patient money? Is it insurance money? And by understanding what's in that bucket is going to help you drill down into where the opportunity for improvement or the opportunity for concern actually is. And for example, if it's patient responsibility, that's not good news at all, because there is a very much lower expectation of getting paid once patient responsibility hits 90 days or even 120 days. There are some studies that show that you've got less than about an 18% chance of collecting any patient money that reaches 120 days old. So you want to make sure that you have a handle on that. If most of that money that's over 120 is insurance money, that's not a great story either, because then you want to understand why that insurance money is sitting out there down to the payer level. This is a quick way how to calculate it. On all of these slides, I actually have a calculation slide. We're not going to spend a lot of time on showing you how to calculate it. I assume that many of you already know how to calculate it, but I'm leaving it in the presentation for those people that want to use it as a reference. But because of the amount of information that we're going to go through today, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on how to calculate a few of these and spend a little bit more time on some that are a little bit trickier to calculate. But some of the causes of an unhealthy AR over 120 would be inadequate denial management. That seems to always be on the list. And based on the poll, when you talk about 35% of you said denials management is your biggest concern, then inadequate denial management could cause your AR over 120 to be higher than what the benchmark would be. Credentialing issues. We're talking to more practices in the last year that credentialing seems to come up more so than in my previous past. I don't know if it's just a coincidence or not, but there does seem to be some credentialing challenges that are out there right now as well. Inadequate claim scrubbers. I mean, most of your PM systems out there have a good claim scrubber that you need to make sure it's configured to find all of the inadequate coding and billing rules and payers so that you can catch those things on the front end. If you want to avoid denials and get your first pass resolution rate as low as possible, and that also will help your AR over 120. Insurance eligibility seems to be an increasing challenge for people. Failure to collect patient balances, all of those things can impact your AR over 120. I did want to mention one thing about all of these KPIs. If you look at the impact of a KPI, there is a way that you can take that KPI, do a mathematical formula, and figure out what the financial impact is for that KPI. For example, in this example, you've got a current AR of 381,000. The benchmark would be about 55,000. The difference would be 325,000. And then you take your net value of what that is. And in this particular example, there would be a one-time influx of cash of 146,000 if they could just move some of that AR that's 120 days and get it collected earlier, right? So I love to do financial impacts on all these KPIs because it starts to tell that story on what is the financial impact of some of your KPIs if they're not as healthy as they need to be. Another accounts receivable metric is days in AR. Some people think this is the most significant KPI. I remember up in, it was one of the New England states, I was working with the practice, and that CEO told me, we don't have any problems. Our days in AR is like 21. And I said, that is great. That 21 is a great days in AR. But it doesn't really tell you whether or not you're collecting all your money or not. It just tells you that your days in AR is great. And so it was really an interesting analysis that we did for them because their net collection rate ended up being about 91% instead of uh, what it should have been. And so they were leaving quite a bit of money, but their days in AR was actually quite healthy because they had some inappropriate adjustment policies in place, right? So they were adjusting things off, very quick to adjust things off that weren't getting paid. But days in AR is the average number of days it takes a practice to get paid. And again, the caution down here is just because you have a low days in AR doesn't necessarily mean that you're collecting all the collectible money there is out there. Your days in AR should stay somewhere in the 30 to 40 range. You might find some studies that will tell you that anything below 50 is healthy. And again, if you want to be average or even below average, or do you want to be in that top quadrant of better performing practices? And MGMA actually has something called a better performer standard. And if you look at that better performer, you're going to find people that are closer to a 30 days in AR or even 28 or 27, something like that would be a better performing practice other than somebody that's operating at a days in AR of 50. But that is, it is a significant um, KPI that you should always know what that is. But again, don't consider it the end all be all. That's the way that you calculate that. And then some of the causes of an unhealthy days in AR are going to be very similar. If you're looking at this, you can see that this list almost looks exactly like the causes of an unhealthy AR over 120 because they are both dealing with accounts receivable. The causes of these two KPIs being unhealthy typically could result from the same type of things: inadequate denial management, denials of inadequate or ineffective front end operational processes or back end operational processes, either front or back, could cause this number to be unhealthy. The average reimbursement per encounter, we're going to kind of speed through this one a little bit. I did want to mention it, and I wanted to presentation because it's one of those KPIs that it's really it's hard to disguise it because you have so many encounters and you have so many payments. So you take your payments divided by the encounters, and that is your average reimbursement per encounter. And you cannot disguise it with adjustments or anything like that. So it is a truth telling KPI. And I think it's really important to know what that KPI is. And I think it's important to know what your benchmark is for your specialty. And then some groups that have a like multi-specialty groups or even like an ortho group that has different types of procedures. You also want to know what that average reimbursement per encounter is for the procedure category. So because depending on that procedure mix, you could come in a lot lower or a lot higher than the benchmark, but you want to make sure that you're looking at the average reimbursement for the procedure category to make sure that you're healthy when it comes to an average reimbursement per encounter. And that can kind of to lead you in a direction of possibly if you're low you need to be, you could look at an E&M utilization review and make sure that you're not undercoding. If you're higher than you need to be, you could look at not overcoding, or you could just look at diversifying your patient or your payer mix, right? So
It's
those are
also
some
a
things.
it's also a useful metric to trend over time because that can alert you when
Yes.
something might be going haywire.
Yeah, that's really good. So, yeah, and some of these KPIs, thank you, James, is um, even let's say that somebody, the benchmark is 125, but this group is 118. 118 might be the right number for that group, not 125. But what's really important then is to look at it trending, because if they used to be 125 and now they're 118, then that means,
Ah,
yeah,
yeah.
it means that there actually is a problem there, and 125 is the right number for them. But we've done a lot of that in our analysis, and so it's a great trending KPI. Another KPI that's super important is the denial percentage. But I will tell you, sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's hard to get. Oh my God. James and I worked on this one deal that it just about killed me. I think it was 100 hours of work we put into that assessment, and it was all about trying to really pinpoint the denials and the percentages, because their denials were like 20% of everything that they were billing was like 20% denials. And their other KPIs, by the way, were really healthy, which didn't make sense. And then that's why it ended up taking so long, because we had to dig in and find out why that was, and we were able to uncover that. Anyway, that one will go down in history for me. I will. It's part of my DNA now. But denials are super important, because you want to get that denial percentage. The avoidable denials should be less than 2%. And I hardly ever find that when I am working with a practice. 2 to 4%, something like that, is going to be a healthy denial rate. And denials, and just like you said in your in the survey poll, is denials definitely is one of your biggest challenges. So it would be really great to hear what some of your denial percentages are, or even if you have a hard time finding your denial percentage, because there's a lot of groups that we um, work with, that you have to run a lot of reports to look at. Sometimes you have to run denial transaction reports to look at the adjustment transaction code that was used to actually post the denial, and then compare that to the total number of claims that went out the door. How many of those claims had avoidable denial reason codes on the line item, to figure out what it is. Now, if you're using some of the clearinghouses, a lot of the clearinghouses should give you that denial percentage, but it's really important to know what that is. And if you do have a high denial, you want to understand: is it eligibility verification? Is it authorizations? Those two things are very front end operationally driven, and a lot of times we'll see as much as 50 to 60% of their denials are front end denials, and that's a very good
Super common.
conversation. Yeah, and you if that's the case, the good news is those things are fixable. I mean, you can fix those front end operations to reduce those denials in a very big way. And sometimes they're back end things, such as coding, justification, enrollment, credentialing, things like that. So it's really important to understand what's getting denied, why they're getting denied, so that you can drill into that. And once you figure out which reports are going to give you that information, you want to run those reports down to the payer level. And then if you can get the detailed reports, you want to look at it from payer and CPT code. And then you can drill in and start to slice it. And then you will be able to find exactly what the culprit is, which payer, which CPT codes, maybe which providers are causing those denials to happen, and pinpoint
Patty,
that.
some systems don't do a good job of generating reports for denials. So we'll during the Q&A, we can tell you there is a circuit workaround if your system's not very good at generating denials. But let's keep moving, and we'll bring that up during the Q&A.
Okay. And then again, you start to see a recurring theme here, right? So inadequate eligibility verification, inadequate prior authorizations, lack of resources. I mean, there are so many people that are short staffed. And we were working with somebody just a few weeks ago that thought they were short staffed, but I mean, I thought they were staffed appropriately, when in fact they were definitely short staffed. And so sometimes there's also benchmarks for that. And that is something that we could help you with if you wanted us to look at your current staffing ratios and help you understand if you're currently staffed, because it's a great opportunity to kind of look at that as well if you are uh, performing lower than you should from a healthy standpoint. But calculating it, this kind of talks a little bit. We won't go into this so much, but this gives you a couple of ideas on how you can run some reports to figure out how to calculate your denial rate. But like I said, sometimes that can get tricky. Hopefully your clearinghouse or your PM system has a dashboard that just tells you right off what your denial rates are. That would be very helpful, but it's something that you need to really pay attention to. Now we're going to move into the reimbursement rates. We're going to talk about the gross collection, the revenue realization, and the net collection rate. We're going to spend a little bit more time on these three things because this to me really is the crux of what you're trying to uncover here when it comes to your reimbursement collection percentages. And so when you look at the gross collection rate is pretty simple. It's what percentage of your gross charges are you collecting? There are benchmarks. A lot of times the benchmark is somewhere between 45 and 55%. Sometimes you are below that because you have higher fee schedules. Fee schedules impact this. So when somebody says, oh, and somebody did, not too long ago, somebody said, hey, can you tell me if a 32% gross collection rate, is that normal? And it's like, okay, well, it really depends, right? It depends on your fee schedules. It depends on why your fee schedule is that, and it could very well be normal. But you can't just look at gross collection rate by itself, and you can't look at gross collection rate without considering what your fee schedules are. And if your gross collection rate is on the lower end, then you do need to look at your fee schedules and make sure that your fee schedules are accurate. The one that asked me that question the other day, we showed him specifically there was a charge that was $150, and he said, "Why am I charging $150? Because Medicare is going to pay $67." And then we pulled up Aetna, and Aetna would pay him $128 for that same procedure. And I said, "That's why your fee schedule is $150, because you do have some payers that will pay you." Close to 150, even though Medicare is not going to pay that particular procedure. So fee schedules do impact that. But again, this is another really good KPI for trending. So when
Mm.
you look at the trending, you want to look at it. So for example, if you used to have a gross collection rate, even if you're at a low end, let's say your gross collection rate used to be 38%, and now it's 32%, that does tell you something. If you haven't had a major change in your fee schedule in the last 12 months, then there's no reason your fee schedule, your gross collection should have been 38 and now it's running 32. That indicates there is definitely something happening there. So it is a great KPI for trending purposes. And again, fee schedules are too low. You could be undercoding. You're not collecting all insurance money. You're not collecting patient responsibility money. Inadequate denial management processes, ineffective front end operations. Those are some of the reasons that could cause a gross collection rate to be lower than it needs to be. Here's an example of how you calculate a gross collection rate, and then we're going to talk about the revenue realization rate. The revenue realization rate is different than the gross collection rate, and it's different than the net collection rate. Many people will get this formula confused with what a net collection rate is. I wish I had time to tell you this whole story of a particular company that used to use this formula and call it the net collection rate, and it was absolutely misleading. But it what revenue realization rate means is what your gross charges are. How much have you gotten paid or adjusted off, regardless of the adjustment reason? So, for example, you got contractual adjustments, but you got bad debt adjustments. You got things just getting adjusted off because nobody's working them. Um, all of those adjustments go into this formula. And if you are looking at your total payments and your total adjustments divided by your gross charge, then you want this number to be like 99 or 100%,
Mhm.
right? So when I'm looking at reimbursement data, I'm going to back up and I'm only going to look at like 12 months starting 90 days ago. Because, like, if I were going to do an assessment today, I really would not look at services that were rendered in January, February, or March, because I'm assuming they haven't 100% been paid or adjudicated. But I would go back and look at all of 2023 and say, okay, well, you've had time to get those claims adjudicated, paid, adjusted off appropriately. And then I would want to analyze all of 2023. And then when I look at my revenue realization rate, I would want it to be close to 100% because that means that you either got paid or contractually adjusted it off or even wrote it off because you
Bad debt.
deemed it bad debt, right? So you would be at 100%. So that is what the revenue realization rate means. And I want to tell you this story. I did this about a year or so ago for a group, and it seemed to make the light bulb come on a little bit. So I want you to think about this. If your revenue realization rate is high, the ideal scenario is you're billing out timely, your claims are adjudicated, contractual adjustments are made, all your patient balances are collected, your revenue realization rate is very high. Not so ideally, your practice is billing out timely, your claims are adjudicated, contractual adjustments are made, patient balances aren't collected at all. Those are just getting written off. Your revenue realization rate is still very high. Another scenario, your practice bills out timely, the claims are adjudicated, some of the claims are denied, contractual adjustments are made, some adjustments are disguised as contractual, some are written off as bad debt, none of your patient balances are collected, patient adjustments are made, bad debt adjustments. Your revenue realization is still high, right? So now we're going to move into what the net collection rate would tell you, because the net collection rate, and you probably can tell from my passion here, I think it's the most important one, but it can be difficult to to calculate. So we're going to talk about it a little bit, and hopefully you will gain just a little insight that you may not have thought of or may not know exactly, and you can gain something from the webinar today. But the net collection rate, that represents the reimbursement that you collect from your total allowed amounts. And in short, it's what you could or should collect. It is the percentage of your collectible dollar that you're receiving. And so the contractual adjustment amount plays into this calculation, and it's very important that your contractual adjustments is correct. That's why it can be very tricky to calculate. But you want this number to be 96, 97, potentially even 98. So if you think about if you think 1.5% bad debt is acceptable, then you'd be looking at a 98.5% net collection if you collected everything else, right? So MGMA will tell you that anything, 96 or higher is healthy. And I would tell you that many practices are capable of collecting 97, 98. And that's what you really should be striving for. But and so back to that scenario, if you have a high net collection rate, your practice is billing out timely, your claims are adjudicated, contractual adjustments are made, and all of your patient balances are collected, that's the only way to get a high net collection rate. Whereas on your revenue realization rate, there were lots of scenarios where you still had a high revenue realization rate, but your net collection rate, not so much. And so it is a true KPI that you cannot disguise unless some of your adjustments are disguised. And we're going to talk about that. And James is grinning because he knows of the of the of the deal that we worked on where that's exactly what was happening. Is it was kind of that one I was telling you about that had the 20% denials and their net collection rate was like 98.
And their AR days was only 8.
8. Yes. And it was just like this kid, something's just not something's just not jiving here. So we had to dig and we had to dig, and come to find out all of those charges that weren't getting collected due to missing authorizations, untimely filing. I mean, there were lots of reasons why those claims were not getting paid, and they were adjusting it off as a discount. Like it was just a acceptable discounted charge. And anyway, it was very enlightening, but it took a lot of work to get to that number. But that's
A,
why
s-
it wasn't working.
a similar scenario that can throw this number off, and we could talk at length about it, is if the adjustment code that is being used is just the wrong one. If you use it, if it looks like an insurance adjustment when it isn't one, you'll assume that it was a non-collectible amount of money because it was, it was the amount past the allowable. And so if that's being used inappropriately, then that money is very hard to track after that. So you have to look close. You have to look
It
close.
is, unless you end up doing a kind of like a random audit, which we end up doing a few times, to uncover that. Because if you're looking at your overall data at a high level and you're looking at summarized reports that says, here's my Blue Cross charges, here's my Blue Cross adjustments, here's my Blue Cross payments, unless you dive in and start seeing, oh, well, this says Blue Cross adjustment, but it's 100% adjusted off, when every other line item that I see, Blue Cross did pay for that procedure. So why did we adjust this procedure off 100% using a Blue Cross adjustment code when every other scenario Blue Cross pays it? And so you have to really start to dig in when you find that. But if you have adjustment codes set up in your system that say, one time there was a group that had, when you pulled their adjustment reasons, they had something like 40 adjustment reasons. And it was everything from billing error, timely filing, authorization absent, ineligible coverage, coverage terminated. I mean, however,
Nice.
it was very nice. And so I gave them kudos. I said, kudos for having so many adjustment reasons. The good news or bad news, however you want to look at it, is because you were so specific, I'm able to really tell you what your net collection rate is, and it's really bad. So anyway, it was kind of funny. It comes down to the adjustments. It really does come down to the adjustments. And so I wanted to kind of point this out here. These are the actual formulas. So for example, like I was talking about, that revenue realization rate, you take your payments plus all of your adjustments, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and divide that by your charges, and that's your revenue realization rate. And if you look at your net collection rate, it's going to be your payments divided by the charges less your contractual adjustments, or in other words, your payments divided by your allowed amounts, right? Now, I do know that there are some PM systems that have the allowed amount in the reports. But you have to be careful, because sometimes let's say that it's $150, the allowed amount's $100, and you're thinking you would have collected $100. And in most cases you would. However, if there was a bundled procedures on that same day, then one of your procedures might have been reduced. And that means that you may not have collected $100 because it was reduced to $50 because of the bundled other codes that were getting paid on the same day. So you have to be very careful by using, quote, the allowed amount that might be on a report. A better way is to look at what your true contractual adjustments are and use your charges less the contractual adjustments, and then that would be your collectible dollar. And then what percentage of that did you collect? And that'll give you a closer net collection rate. This is just an example where you have your total bill charges 7.2, your contractual adjustments of 3.6, total adjustments, which would include bad debt, would be 3.8, and your total payments are 3.1. After we get off the webinar, if you want to do a little math test, you can go check yourself and see if you could do that math test and see what you would come up with. But this example shows you that the net collection rate would come out at 89.5 and the revenue realization rate would come out at 96.8, right? So this is an example of how those two collection rates can vary drastically, right, from looking at that math. So hopefully looking at the mathematical and looking at the formulas gives you a new insight into the difference between a revenue realization rate and a net collection rate. And hopefully that was helpful. This again is just showing you that scenario. There's only one way to really get a high net collection rate, with the exception of disguising the adjustments like the story that we told you. But otherwise, if you have a high net collection rate, then typically you're doing things really well. And these are some of the causes of a low net collection rate. Again, following that same recurring theme, you could have a lack of resources, short staffed, ineffective coding, credentialing issues, ineffective front end operations, ineffective write off policies, which are those adjustments that we were talking about. And so those are some of the things that could cause that. So I know that we're wrapping up and we want to get closer to a Q&A session. So a few little wrapping up points here is that, I truly believe that knowledge is power, and there is power in knowing your KPIs. And so, if you can just run your reports, calculate those KPIs, compare them to dashboards if you are given those dashboards, use this webinar if that's helpful in helping you calculate those KPIs, and then start digging in deeper in the areas where you see that KPI is not as healthy as it should be. Because one thing that you will find, and I truly believe this, is that KPIs will tell the story that you all want to know, right? Especially if you have any of those concerns that we talked about in the beginning of the webinar. And so, why do you want to conduct a financial analysis on yourself? And that is because, the key stakeholders, you're the business owners, the providers, um, it's a value to them. This is stuff they need to know. You need to know if there's an opportunity to make revenue improvement. You need to know if there is a way to reduce cost or increase efficiencies in areas that are inefficient. You need to know what it's going to cost you if you do have problems, what it's going to cost you to fix those problems. It also is a great opportunity for you to evaluate your staff quality as well as your staff quantity. I will tell you that as thousands of these analyses that I have done, it's usually not the competence. People are not incompetent. It is it's usually a quantity. It's a staff shortage. It's not the level of competency, but it does give you the ability to evaluate your quality and your quantity. I have some examples of like if you go down this exercise and you start to calculate your KPIs, I would suggest creating a little scorecard for yourself. Look at what the benchmark is, put your KPI scores there, and so that you can get a scorecard on yourself comparing all of these KPIs to what the benchmarks are. And then when you're looking at transaction data, for example, these are some examples of just assessments that have been done in the last couple of months. But when you're looking at transaction data, you want to look over a 12-month period. Did that accounts receivable go up or did it go down? In this example, it actually increased by $2 million because you have charges going out, payments coming in, adjustments being made. So your accounts receivable kind of just stays steady. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Over a 12-month period, you want it to kind of be zero as far as what the net change in your AR is. So that's something to look for. You can also look at graphs. This is a pretty typical example where you got charges and you got adjustments, but you can see that the payments are kind of flat. You can also look at visits versus charges. The visits are going up in this particular case, but the charges are not. So what's the reason behind that? This is a very typical example where you got charges, you got adjustments going up, and you have payments trending down. This is actually a very bad example, right? Payments are going down, charges are pretty steady, but look at these adjustments. And then definitely somebody came to clean up adjustments here, right,
Bingo.
in May and June. So, I mean, you can look at trending from a transaction standpoint, and that starts to tell a little bit of a story. When you're looking at accounts receivable, you want to look at patient responsibility versus insurance responsibility. Overall, you want about less than 10% of your total AR to be patient responsibility. And then when you look at that 120 bucket, you want to see what's in that bucket. Is it insurance? Is it patient? And then we kind of talked a little bit about what that means. You want to look at your AR over 120 as a percentage. In this example, it's 50% of their total AR is over 120 days old. Obviously, That's not a good trend. Then you can do a little financial impact. This is a great example of a financial impact of the AR over 120. Their current AR over 120 is 2.8. If their benchmark would have been about 840, the difference is close to $2 million. And based on this practice's net value, which would be like the gross collection rate, that's about $700,000. Now, that doesn't mean the 700,000 is lost money, but it does mean that that 700,000 should already be in the bank, right? That is a true analysis that we just did about. I know who this is actually. That was about a month ago. Um, this is that, I think it's the same group here. 5.6 million. Yep, 5.6 million is the total AR balance. Their days in AR is 46. The benchmark for this specialty was 28. That's a difference of their total benchmark. I mean, their total AR at benchmark would be about 3.3. They're running about 5.6. That's about 2.2 million more than what it should be. Again, you can do a financial impact, and that's basically telling them that if their days in AR was healthier, that would be about a one-time influx of about 764,000 that should have already been collected. Those are just some examples. This is make sure when you're looking at denials, you want to break those denials into front end, back end, and maybe even coding in the middle, and really understand where those denials are coming from. This is a lot of denials. This group had 21 million in denials. Um, and then reimbursement data. This is an example of why the net collection rate can be so powerful. If this particular example you're looking at, the net collection rate is running at 62.5, which is just dreadfully low. This is, I'm giving you a really extreme example here, but you can see that if the net collection rate is 62.5, and they could collect at 96 or 97, that instead of collecting $3 million on that 12 months of data, they would have collected 4.6 million instead of 3. That's an improvement of 1.6 million. And then we did a deeper analysis on this deal to show that instead of collecting 16.25% as a gross collection rate, they should be able to easily get to a 25%. And then that also was corroborated here when you're looking at their net collection improvement. But that's a significant example. This is a more typical example. This is a 12 doctor multi-specialty group that was collecting at about 90%. And not a whole lot of alarms going off for them that they're not, not looking at it as maybe as closely as they should have. But 90% net collection rate, not realizing that if they could get to 97 or 98, which is very doable for this particular group, they would be collecting about between 630,000 and 700,000 more annually. That's about an 8 or 9% bump in their revenue. That's super typical of what you can find when you start looking at your financial analysis. And I don't know any practice that if they couldn't get an 8 or 9% bump in their revenue, wouldn't be interested in figuring out how do I do that, right? And so there's the KPIs can tell you that story. And so one thing that we wanted to talk about here is a revenue cycle analysis, which we call an RCA internally here. That is something that we're offering all the participants that joined us on our webinar today. We're happy to offer you a rev cycle assessment if you need help doing it. If you don't need help doing it, hopefully the webinar will give you some guidelines and some calculations to help you conduct your own financial analysis. But I do recommend that everybody go through this exercise and really take a good pulse on how you're doing financially. But if you do choose to take us up on our offer, we don't charge anything for it, and the deliverable would be your practices data with tailored results. It could be anywhere from 10 to 40 pages in the presentation deck, and we would give you some recommendations on where the areas are that you need to focus on, and then do a complete summary on what the financial improvement opportunity might be. And this is how you receive your complimentary assessment. You can complete the request form that you're going to get in an email that you receive, or you can email info@unislink.com, or of course you could email me or James, or you can chat in the box right now, I think, and say you want one. Whatever you want to do to communicate to us that you're interested in this complimentary assessment, we are happy to oblige. And I don't know, James, if you want to say anything about the assessment.
Nothing, but it's a worthwhile experience. There's no reason for you not to want to do it, and we're happy to do it for you. So, Patty, we have a whole slew of questions and maybe only 10 minutes for us to be able to get
Okay.
through those. So let's see what we can do by addressing these. So maybe this first one that I got is just kind of where would you start um, if you're new to using KPIs to manage your practice? What are the best KPIs to start looking at, and then sort of like beginner level and then advanced level.
Okay. So I think the if you're new to KPIs, I think the best place to start is accounts receivable, right? Look at your accounts receivable. What percentage of your AR is over 120 days old? If you don't know how to calculate the days in AR, you can get it from today's webinar. Calculate your days in AR and start with your accounts receivable metrics. I think that's the easy place to start and a good place to start. Then I think that you can move into your average reimbursement per encounter and see what you're collecting at a per encounter level to see if that seems healthy to you. And then you need to start to get into your reimbursement rates, your gross collection, revenue realization, and net collection rate after that.
Great. So Spencer Brown had to ask a great question. He may have missed the beginning, which is what's an acceptable rate for recurring denials? So he's using the word recurring, and Spencer, you can elaborate on that in the chat if you want. I'll just say before you answer, Patty, that the latest data is showing that 15 to 20% of all claims are just flat out denied. So you can expect that percentage of denials to happen right out of the chute. The question is, what do we do to try to address the ones that are getting denied? Um, thanks, Arshit. We're going to answer your question in just a second if you can hang on about staffing. But Patty, do you want to add anything to that
No,
in
that's
terms of
exactly what I
what's the benchmark for like for medical practice? What level of denial should they be willing to accept?
it's I mean, I was going to say exactly what you said. I mean, the data shows 15 to 20% of claims are getting denied, and then you need to focus in on what are the avoidable versus the non-avoidable denials, and then you can run some reports by filtering out those reason codes, and then that's when you want it to be below 4%.
Great answer. And so let me just throw something in here about that. We've seen a lot of metrics here, and you're going to see them. But there's average, and then there's what's achievable, and you don't want to be average. And so I mean, certainly you can, but it's a lot. It's super easy to be average. If you want to know what's achievable, though, you can look at like hospitalist groups that typically have huge days in AR because of charge lag and things like that. When in reality, we have lots of clients that have days in AR that are way lower than 30 for those groups. So that's achievable. We know that that's possible. So don't settle for average on your KPIs. Let's answer Archit's before he goes, Patty. I know it's not really a subject that we cover today, but what he's asking is, tell us a little bit about how you would go about calculating staffing FTEs. You just
Oh,
alluded to it a little bit.
yeah,
So this is going to be a bonus, and if you stay on, we'll answer the rest of the questions on KPIs. But his
yeah.
question is this, and he's also considering onshore and offshore in that question.
Okay, so that's a great question. So MGMA actually has staffing ratios that per specialty that will tell you kind of what those staffing ratios are. They're going to be anywhere from, and when you think about um, MGMA standards, you've got something called business operations, you've got clinical support, and then you have front end operations. And so front end operations is somewhere usually between 1.1 and 1.3 FTEs per provider. Then you've got business operations that's again somewhere usually between 1 and 1.2 FTE per provider. So overall, when you're thinking about front end and business operations, which I consider kind of the revenue cycle piece, you could be looking at anywhere from 2.7 to 3.3 FTEs per provider, which is needed to meet your benchmarked FTE ratios. So having said that, there's always things that can factor into where you need to tweak that a little bit. Like, for example, one of the best practices, a big cardiology group that I worked with, they were able to get their business operations running about zero 0.8 FTE per provider from a business operation operation standpoint, because they were just lean and mean and just a great machine, right? And so you can tweak those a little bit, but there are benchmarks based on FTE ratios. Another way that you can do it is you can look at the number of encounters, because sometimes, like, let's say a physician, an average physician's going to do 48 encounters in a year, 400 a month, but you've got a physician that's doing 700 a month. Okay, well, that physician may need a little bit of a higher FTE ratio for business operations and front end operations because his encounter volume is a little more than average. But then you have a provider that has less than that. So another way that you can do staffing ratios, I know my answers are going to be way too long, but
It's the
another way.
workload. Yeah,
Okay,
I
is
know
the
where you're going.
workload. Yeah. So
Yeah,
you could look at the workload, and then, you can, for example, there's 3,300 uh 3,300 claims a year that a claims analyst can work. And then when you're working about working denials, you can only work about 5 or 6 an hour to follow up on a denied claim. So literally, you could take the workload and then you dive into each of the functional areas of the revenue cycle to determine how many staff do you need, right?
that's right.
And
And then
yeah,
once you've done that, Arch, it now you know your staff. You can say, okay, this percentage of the staff is going to be offshore, and this percentage of the staff is going to be onshore, and then you'll be able to calculate what your total staffing cost is going to be required for the load that you have. So, super good question. Sorry, that was a bonus question. So, let me ask. Um, One of these question I got is, we're a hospitalist group. Our days in AR are over 50. What is a realistic days in AR for a hospitalist group?
yeah. So we actually have a lot of data on a lot of hospitalist group that you could compare to some live hospital groups on how they're running. But I would say probably 45 to 50 is probably average for a hospitalist group.
Yeah, I think the key there is to look at what's achievable. What's going to be pivotal there is a hospital-based specialty. You're going to be at the mercy of the hospital for the registration information, and then lots of times in hospital-based specialties, there's a lot of charge lag, meaning there's a lot of time between when the service actually happened and when the charge actually gets in the system. And of course, the longer that is, the longer your days in AR are going to end
Yeah,
up being.
and another thing that's all true. Another thing that really impacts hospital-based physician groups is sometimes you're relying on the hospital for the insurance information, and we all know that it's not always great. So what happens is so what happens is the claim actually gets denied, and then you have to get the right insurance information. Then you have to refile the claim. All those things are going to increase your days in AR also. So if you look at, are there any solutions that you could put in place that would bypass uh, the incorrect hospital information that you're getting so that you can correct the insurance information that you're getting from the hospital before the claim goes out the door, which there are some ways to do that, then you get a better return on the adjudicated claims that you're sending out, and that can improve your days in AR too. But if you're totally relying on the hospital insurance information, you don't have anything in the middle that's trying to fix that or correct it or check it, then your days in AR is going to be higher than those people who are trying to do something about it, right?
Yeah,
To make it better.
let me say that in a slightly different way. Reducing your denials speeds up your days in AR.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
if you're hamstrung by bad registrations happening at the hospital level, then it's absolutely going to affect your days in AR because you're going to have to get denied, then you're going to have to fix it, and then you're going to have to resubmit it. Better to get it done the first time, right? Correctly. So all of those things will reduce your days in AR. If you're clinic based, what I would say is your goal should be to get charges out the same day as your data service, right? So make sure, at the very least, make sure your providers are submitting their charts between 24 and 48 hours from when the service is done. All right. Do we have any? We have 1 minute, so I have to pick and choose. We will, if your question didn't get answered, send us an email and we will answer your question directly. I got to cherry pick what I let's see here. What Let's end with this one. What KPIs should I be looking at to assess payer performance?
So, I where I would start is I would look at all of them at the payer level. But where you can start is you take your aged AR report with your buckets so that you can have your over 120. You do it by payer. and then you calculate the AR over 120 for each payer. So let's say your AR over 120 overall is 11% or 15 or whatever, which is not bad. But then if you do it by payer, you might find that this payer is 45%, 60% of this AR is over 120 for this payer. So you definitely want to look at that by payer. And then you could calculate your days in AR, which takes several reports to do that at a payer level if you don't have a dashboard that already does it for you. But your goal should be to try to get to a reimbursement percentage at a payer level, and gross collection would be the easiest one to do. So you could go and look, let's say your gross collection is 45% overall. You want to look at gross collection by payer, and you'll find any outliers there. So if you have a payer that's really at a low gross collection rate, that would be a good place to direct you to start looking at other KPIs for that particular payer.
Let me add a couple to that. If you could calculate net collections by payer, then that's obviously a phenomenal way of looking at
Right.
it. Your days in AR by payer. So now take the same formula that you did for days in AR, but now break it by payer. And when a payer is taking a long time to pay, it's going to show up in their days in AR by payer, right? And then you can go all the way down to reimbursement per CPT. Just remember, you may have negotiated with that payer to accept a lower reimbursement for that CPT for the pleasure of seeing their patients. So take that into account. But it's a great way of benchmarking if that's the question. How do I benchmark one payer against another? You can always look at how much you're getting paid for the code. Usually you compare to Medicare, which is the worst, and everybody else is hopefully some multiple higher of that. Wow, I have at least 8 questions, Patty, here that we didn't get to, including one from Raja Danish about fee schedules. Maybe we'll sneak this one in. What's the best way to approach it, um, to like charge master? Uh, is
It's a
how
great
it's a
question.
he says a
Yeah.
tedious process. How do you
I
increase your fee schedule when
Or
you're
how
dealing
to,
with
and
providers?
also it's kind of how do you approach your doctors? I'm reading into that question also, right? So I think it's a multifaceted question. I think it's a great question. If you haven't had First of all, if you haven't had your contracts renegotiated in like the last 5 years or something, you're leaving a ton of money on the table. I went to an MGMA session last year, and it was remarkable. That woman did a fantastic job. But you got to make sure that you're negotiated the best fees that you can from these payers. But having said that, if your charge master needs to be, your fee schedules need to be changed, the best way to talk to a physician about the the fee schedules needing to be changed is to use data, right? You run a report, you show him or her what the fee schedule currently is, what the impact it's having on having that fee schedule. Then you show them what the fee schedule should be, um, and then you show them the difference in that. I guess that's answering the question. I'm not positive if that's answering the schedule.
Raj, if that didn't get you what you needed, send us an email.
Yeah,
Thank you all so much for the tremendous interaction here. Wow, we had a tremendous number of people stay all the way to the end through all of those Q&As. So thank you so much. If you'd like to get, and just as housekeeping, you're going to get an email, and in that email, you'll get a link to play this on demand, this video that we did today, along with downloading the slides so that you can have the whole deck that Patty showed today. And then if you'd like to get your own assessment, you want some help doing that, we're happy to help you with that. You can use that same process to send us a message and say, hey, I'm interested. What does it take? What's the next step type of thing? But we're grateful for you all attending and for the interaction all the way to the end. We'll catch you on our next webinar. If this is interesting, by the way, we were only able to touch it at a very high level. So if you would like us to make a deeper dive in either a single topic or even this whole topic, but maybe do a longer session, we'd love to hear your feedback on that because we have many more webinars planned for you. So thank you so much. And thank
thanks
you, Patty,
everybody.
for
Yep,
sharing your knowledge.
great to hang out again. Thanks everybody.